You are standing in a cold garage in Stuttgart, and the mechanic wipes his hands, looks at the odometer, and shrugs like it is nothing. 500,000 miles. Same engine, same transmission. No rebuild. The car idles as quiet as the day it left the factory, and nobody in that garage thinks it is a miracle. Here is the claim I want you to sit with. The average American car gets scrapped somewhere around 200,000 miles, and most people believe that is just the natural lifespan of a machine. It is not. It is the lifespan of a car owned by someone who was never taught what the Germans have quietly known for generations. The difference is not the badge on the hood. The difference is a set of small, boring, almost invisible habits. I spent most of my life doing it the expensive way. I traded cars every few years. I believed the dealership when they told me a noise was normal, and it took a stubborn old neighbor near Ulm and a maintenance logbook from 1936 that I will tell you about before the end to show me how wrong I had been. None of this needs a new car or a fancy garage. This is for the car sitting in your driveway right now. So let me take you back to that garage, because the first thing that old mechanic told me flipped everything I thought I knew about engines. He put his hand flat on the hood and said one word: warm. He asked me how I started my car on a cold morning, and I said the way everyone does: turn the key, drive off, get to work. He shook his head slowly, the way my own grandfather used to when I said something foolish. In Germany, he told me, you give the engine its minute. Not 10 minutes of idling, that is a myth that wastes fuel. 30 to 60 seconds. Just enough for the oil to climb from the pan and coat the metal before you ask the engine to work. Here is why that matters, and here is the number that stopped me cold. Studies on engine wear have found that the vast majority of all engine wear, some researchers put it as high as 75%, happens in the first moments after a cold start before the oil has fully circulated. Think about that. 3/4 of the damage your engine will ever suffer happens in seconds you never even think about. The Germans think about those seconds. They treat the first mile of every drive as sacred. They keep the revolutions low, they stay gentle, they let the oil and the metal come up to temperature together like two old friends warming their hands by the same fire. I used to laugh at this. I would see my neighbor let his diesel settle for a moment in his driveway and then drive the first few streets like he was carrying eggs, and I thought he was just an overly careful old man. But his car had close to 400,000 kilometers on it and still pulled like new, and mine was making a sound I kept pretending I could not hear. That gentle first mile is real, and it costs you nothing. The lie is the oil change interval. Somewhere along the way, the industry convinced us that oil is basically permanent. 10,000 miles, 15,000 miles. Some manuals now stretch it further, and the marketing wants you to believe this is progress. The German machinists I came to know treated their oil like blood. To them, oil is not a liquid you replace when a light comes on. It is the single cheapest insurance you will ever buy for the most expensive part of your car. Now here is where it gets interesting, and here is where you start to see who benefits from your not knowing this. Longer oil change intervals were sold to us as convenience. Less hassle, fewer trips to the shop. But a longer interval also means the manufacturer looks cheaper to own on paper during the warranty period, and once that warranty is up and the engine starts to suffer from years of tired, sludge-thick oil, well, that is exactly when they hope you will walk back onto the lot and buy a new one. The disposable car was not an accident. It was designed. The old German habit is to change the oil more often than the book says, and to actually look at it. Pull the dipstick. Rub the oil between your fingers. Fresh oil is smooth and amber. Oil that feels gritty, or smells burnt, or has gone black and thick like coffee left on the burner all day, that oil is sandpaper running through your engine. My neighbor near Ulm changed his oil religiously and kept every receipt in a folder in his glove box, dated and mileaged, going back decades. I thought it was obsessive. Now I understand it was the whole secret. Therefore, the real question is not how long you can go between oil changes. The real question is what kind of oil is in there. And that is where the second betrayal hides, because most people are pouring the wrong thing into their engine without ever knowing it. The wrong thing is not always cheap oil. Sometimes it is the wrong weight, the wrong specification, the wrong oil for the climate you actually live in. Germans are almost fanatical about matching the oil to the engine in the season. There is a reason for this that goes back further than most people realize. German engineering culture was forged around precision tolerances, the idea that every part is machined to fit within a hair's width of perfect. When the parts fit that precisely, the oil between them has to be exactly right, or those beautiful tight tolerances become a liability instead of a strength. The practical habit is simple. Find the exact oil specification your engine was designed for, not just the brand the quick lube shop happens to be pushing that month. It is usually stamped right on the oil cap or buried in the manual. Match it. In colder weather, a thinner cold rating flows faster on that critical first start we talked about. This is not about spending more. A correct budget oil beats an expensive wrong one every single time. But oil is what runs through the engine. The next habit the Germans obsess over is about what happens underneath the whole car, in the parts you never see until they fail and strand you on the side of the road. I am talking about the things that flex and turn and hold the car together. The suspension bushings, the joints, the brakes, the cooling system. There is a German word that gets thrown around and it points to a whole way of thinking. The idea is that a car is a system, and a system is only as strong as its weakest neglected part. Americans tend to fix what breaks. Germans replace what is about to break before it takes 3 other parts down with it. Take the cooling system. Coolant, like oil, is not permanent, though we treat it that way. Old coolant turns acidic over time and quietly eats away at your water pump, your radiator, the gaskets, the very heart of the engine's temperature control. The German habit is to flush and replace coolant on a schedule every few years, long before it turns to acid. It is a job that costs very little and prevents the single most catastrophic failure a car can have. An overheated engine, which can crack a head or warp a block and end the car in an afternoon. Now let me hammer the cost of not knowing this. A coolant flush might cost you the price of a nice dinner. A cracked cylinder head from cooling neglect can cost more than the car is worth, which is precisely how a perfectly good vehicle ends up in the scrapyard at 150,000 miles. The car did not die. It was allowed to die. And that word allowed is where I need to introduce you to the quiet villain in this whole story, because once I saw it, I could not unsee it. The villain is not a person. It is a business model. Somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, the car stopped being sold to us as a machine you maintain and keep and started being sold to us as a fashion you replace. Planned obsolescence, they call it politely. The design of parts that wear out on schedule. The styling that makes a 5-year-old car feel embarrassing. The financing that keeps you in a perpetual payment so a new one always feels within reach. An entire economy was built on the assumption that you would give up on your car right around the time it was actually broken in and running its best. The Germans, at least the older generation I learned from, never fully bought into this. Not because they were poor, but because they came from a culture that watched things get rebuilt after the war, that remembered scarcity, that saw waste as a kind of moral failure. To throw away a working machine because a newer one had a nicer dashboard, to them that was not success. That was foolishness dressed up as progress. Therefore, the whole game changes when you decide, quietly, that you are going to be the kind of person who keeps a car for 20 years. Every habit I am describing suddenly makes sense. And the next one is maybe the most important of all because it is the one that separates people who fix problems from people who prevent them. That habit is listening, actually listening to your car. The old mechanic in Stuttgart told me that a German driver knows the sound of his own engine the way a mother knows the sound of her own child's cough. Every rattle means something. Every new vibration is a message. The moment something changes, they investigate. They do not turn up the radio. They do not wait for the light. They catch the $50 problem before it becomes the $5,000 problem. There is real science underneath this instinct. A worn part almost always announces itself before it fails. A wheel bearing hums before it seizes. Brake pads squeal on purpose, because engineers built a little metal tab in there specifically to scream at you before the pad wears down to metal and destroys the rotor. A failing belt chirps. A tired suspension component clunks over bumps it used to swallow silently. Your car is talking constantly. Most people have simply stopped listening, and I was the worst offender. I had a chirp for months. I told myself it was nothing. That chirp was a belt tensioner, and when it finally let go, it took the belt with it, and the belt took the cooling, and I sat on the shoulder of a highway watching the temperature needle climb, paying for a lesson that would have cost me almost nothing if I had just paid attention in month 1. The secret was never a special part or a hidden trick, and if you want to go even deeper into this way of thinking, I want to tell you about something I put together. I wrote it all down in a series called German Basics, German Deep, and German Complete. 3 books that take this exact philosophy, the habits, the mindset, the practical knowledge that convenience culture tried to make us forget, and lay it out clearly so you can actually use it. If you find yourself nodding along to everything in this video, those books were written for you. You can find the details in the description below. But let us get back to the car, because the next habit is about something most of us have been told a flat-out lie about, and that lie is printed right in your owner's manual. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right about now. You are thinking this all sounds fine for people with a garage and tools and a lift and a whole free weekend. You are thinking your car is old, your hands are not what they were, and you are not about to start crawling underneath anything. So let me speak directly to you, because this next part is built for you specifically, and it is the part that requires nothing but your own 2 eyes and about 10 minutes a month. Here is the German habit that changed the most for me and costs absolutely nothing. It is the walkaround. Once a week or even once a month, you walk slowly around your own car before you get in. That is it. You look. You look at the tires. Are they low? Is one flatter than the others? Is the tread wearing evenly, or is one edge chewed up? Because uneven wear tells you about alignment and suspension long before anything breaks. You look under the car at the spot where it was parked. Is there a stain? Clear is usually just air conditioning water. That is fine. But a dark spot is oil, a bright green or orange spot is coolant, a reddish spot could be transmission fluid. A puddle is a warning delivered to your driveway for free. You pop the hood, and you do not need to be a mechanic. You just look. You check the oil on the dipstick. You glance at the coolant level in its clear tank. Both have simple minimum and maximum lines a child could read. You look at the belts for cracks. You check that the fluid reservoirs are where they should be. This whole thing takes less time than waiting in line for coffee, and it is exactly what my neighbor near Ulm did every Sunday morning. Coffee in one hand, the other resting on the fender like he was checking on a horse. The reason this works is almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Nearly every catastrophic car failure begins as a small, visible, cheap-to-fix warning that the owner never saw because the owner never looked. You do not need tools. You do not need knowledge. You need the habit of looking. That is the whole thing. And once you start, you will catch things weeks before they would have left you stranded. Now, there is one more thing you can do with no tools at all, and it applies to how you drive, which is completely free and completely in your control. Smoothness. Germans, for all their reputation on the Autobahn, are remarkably smooth drivers in daily life. Gentle on the accelerator, gentle on the brakes, anticipating the stoplight far ahead and coasting toward it instead of racing up and slamming on the brakes. Every hard stop wears your brakes and your tires. Every hard launch strains your transmission and drinks your fuel. Smoothness is free, and it might be worth tens of thousands of miles over the life of the car. Therefore, you do not need to become a mechanic to drive like your car will last forever. You just need to look and to listen and to be gentle. But there is one more system on your car that the Germans treat with a respect bordering on reverence, and neglecting it is the fastest way I know to turn a great car into a dangerous one. That system is the brakes, and more specifically, the brake fluid. Here is something almost nobody in America knows, and it genuinely shocked me when I learned it. Brake fluid is hygroscopic, which is a fancy word that means it absorbs water out of the air over time. Even sealed in your car, brake fluid slowly pulls in moisture year after year. And water in your brake lines does two terrible things. It corrodes the expensive brake components from the inside, and worse, when you brake hard down a long hill and the brakes get hot, that absorbed water can boil into vapor, and vapor compresses, and suddenly your brake pedal goes soft and sinks to the floor exactly when you need it most. The German habit, backed by German engineering standards, is to flush the brake fluid every 2 years no matter what, not when it fails. On a schedule, it is one of the cheapest services at any shop, and it is the difference between brakes that work for 30 years and brakes that fail on a mountain road. Most American drivers have never once had their brake fluid changed, and they have no idea it was ever supposed to happen. That silence is not an accident either. There is no glamour and little profit in a simple fluid flush, so nobody advertises it, and the knowledge just quietly fades. But brakes and oil and coolant are all things under the hood. The Germans also understood something about the body of the car itself, something that determines whether your car reaches 500,000 miles or rots away long before the engine ever gets tired. That something is rust. An engine can be immortal, but if the body dissolves around it, the car is finished. Germans, especially in the snowy south and the salty north, developed an obsession with fighting corrosion that most Americans never learned. They wash the underside of the car in winter, not just the paint. Road salt is the great destroyer, and it collects underneath, in the wheel wells, in the seams, where you never see it, quietly eating the metal that holds everything together. The habit is simple and cheap. In winter, or if you live anywhere near the ocean, you rinse the underside of your car regularly. Many German drivers use car washes specifically because they spray the undercarriage. They keep the drain holes at the bottom of the doors and sills clear because those little holes let water escape, and when they clog, water pools inside the body panels and rots them from the inside out. A pipe cleaner or a small screwdriver clears them in seconds. This one habit can add a decade to the life of a car body, and almost nobody does it. And here is the deeper truth underneath all of this, the thing that finally clicked for me. Every single one of these habits is small. Warming the oil for a minute, changing it a little early, matching the specification, flushing the coolant and the brake fluid on schedule, walking around the car, listening, driving smooth, rinsing the salt away. Not one of them is difficult. Not one of them is expensive. But together, practiced faithfully over the years, they are the entire difference between a car that dies at 150,000 miles and one that runs past 500,000 without ever needing a major repair. Which brings me to the thing I promised you at the very beginning, the logbook from 1936, and the discovery that tied this whole philosophy together for me and gave it a name. When my old neighbor near Ulm finally passed, his son was clearing out the garage, and he handed me something wrapped in an oilcloth. It was a small booklet, brittle at the edges, its cover marked with the year 1936. It was a maintenance logbook, the kind German motorists were encouraged to keep in that era when a car was a serious investment meant to last a lifetime. Inside, in fading pencil, were columns: date, distance traveled, oil checked, grease points serviced, observations, line after line, week after week, decade after decade, in the hands of a father and then a son. And on the inside cover, someone had written a phrase by hand, an old workshop saying, translated, it meant roughly this: care is cheaper than repair. That was the whole philosophy in 4 words. Not fix it when it breaks, not replace it when it ages. Care for it constantly, in small ways, so that it never breaks at all. That logbook was not unusual for its time. This was a documented culture. In the early days of the automobile in Germany, keeping a service book was considered simply what a responsible owner did, and that expectation carried forward into the famous German service booklet that still, to this day, gets stamped at every maintenance visit and dramatically raises the resale value of a used car. A German used car with a complete stamped service history sells for noticeably more than an identical car without one, because the record itself is proof of care. The habit became so ingrained that the entire market rewards it. Here is what I want you to take from that little book. The secret was never a special part or a hidden trick. The secret was the record, the act of writing it down, because when you keep a simple log of what you did and when, three things happen. You never forget a service. You spot patterns, like a fluid that keeps dropping, long before they become failures. And you build on paper the exact history that proves the car was cared for, which is money in your pocket the day you sell it. So this weekend, here is what you do, and it is almost laughably simple. Get a cheap notebook, put it in your glove box, write today's date and your mileage. From now on, every time you do anything to the car, oil, coolant, brakes, tires, even the walkaround, you write one line. Date, mileage, what you did. That is the entire method that kept a car alive across 2 generations in a garage near Ulm, and it is the same method quietly protecting German engines right now while the rest of us throw perfectly good cars away. You just recovered something that was taken from you quietly, on purpose. Not a gadget, not a product, a way of seeing your car as something worth keeping, and the simple, honest knowledge to keep it. That is worth more than any new car on any lot. I made this because I believe the most valuable knowledge in the world is the practical kind, the kind that was working just fine for ordinary people until someone realized there was more profit in making us forget it. If that belief lives in you too, then you are exactly the kind of person this is for. Now I want to hear from you. Think back to that chirp I ignored, the belt tensioner that stranded me on the highway. What is the sound your car is making right now that you have been pretending not to hear? Tell me in the comments, be specific, and tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I read them and I answer. And if you know someone who trades their car in every few years and cannot understand why they never get ahead, send this to them. It might be the most useful thing you give them all year. If you want to keep recovering this kind of buried practical German knowledge, the methods that convenience culture tried to make us forget, then come with me. Next time I am going to show you the German habit for keeping a house warm in winter that has nothing to do with a thermostat, an old method that our grandparents knew and that quietly cuts a heating bill in half. You will not believe how simple it is, and you will wonder, like I did, how we ever let ourselves forget it. I'm about to open the garage door the rest of the way. This video gave you the overview, but inside the Old Ways circle, I pick up right where we just stopped. And you can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself. No bots. Folks like you are already in there with me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel any time, one click. No risk.